So for your first assignment, you're going to create an annotated bibliography. So what is an annotated bibliography? An annotated bibliography is simply a list, a reference list, where you summarize each article or each reference citation. So the purpose of an annotated bibliography is to provide a brief summary and evaluation of each source that a researcher has consulted for a particular project. An annotated bibliography can serve several purposes, including organization. An annotated bibliography helps a researcher keep track of the sources they have used and provides a convenient way to organize and access information about each source. Evaluation. An annotated bibliography allows the reader to evaluate the quality and relevance of each source. This can help the researcher determine which sources are most useful for their project. Research. An annotated bibliography can help the researcher identify gaps in the research and suggest areas for further investigation. Avoiding plagiarism. By providing a brief summary of each source and identifying the key ideas and arguments, an annotated bibliography helps the researcher avoid unintentional plagiarism by ensuring that they properly attribute the ideas and arguments of others. In summary, the purpose of an annotated bibliography is to help the researcher conduct thorough research, organize their sources, and critically evaluate and use the sources effectively in their project. And so there are many different kinds of annotated bibliography. So an annotated bibliography is a list of citations to books, articles, and other sources, accompanied by a brief descriptive and evaluative paragraph or annotation about each source. In APA format, there are two main types of annotated bibliography: descriptive annotated bibliography, also known as a summative annotated bibliography. So a descriptive or summative annotated bibliography summarizes the main points of the source, including the author's thesis or arguments, the methods used to support the thesis, and the conclusions reached. It does not offer a critical evaluation of the source, but rather describes it. So when you do a descriptive annotated bibliography, you are doing a summary, just summing up what does the article say, what happened in the article. Think of it like a book report. So you're just describing what's in, just like a book report describes what's in the book, and a summative or descriptive annotated bibliography is a paragraph that just describes what's in the article. A critical, and then another kind of annotated bibliography is known as either a critical annotated bibliography or evaluative annotated bibliography. A critical annotated bibliography not only summarizes the source, but evaluates it critically. It assesses the relevance, accuracy, and quality of the information presented, as well as the author's credentials, biases, and potential conflicts of interest. In addition, it compares the source to other sources on the same topic and analyzes its strengths and weaknesses. So typically, when you're at the beginning of your research project, you don't know that much about your research project. You usually start out with a lot of sources in which you're using the descriptive annotated bibliography method, where you summarize a lot of articles. Then once you get to know your topic really well, I remember I had to write a paper for a whole year. I remember my professor kept saying, you're going to become the expert of that topic. So after a while, I really did get to know that topic. And as I started reading more and more sources, I was able to critically evaluate, thinking, you know what, this source is not as good as the other source, or this author is not as good as the other author. So as soon as I started having an opinion about what I wasn't just simply summarizing the main points, but I actually had an opinion about it, saying, well, this is not a really good article, or this author doesn't do that much research, and so on and so on. As soon as I started to put my 2 cents in there, that's known as a critical annotated bibliography. But for me, that came later on, like the second half of the year, when I started having an opinion, then, and also the professor started asking, oh, this is just a summary. What's your opinion on it? What's your take on it? He started asking questions. I go, what do you mean, what's my take on it? I'm just, gathering sources and doing my literature review. Yes, but you have to have an opinion to your thesis. Remember, when you write an essay, you make a claim, and that's what I tell my students these days. So my professor required that I not just summarize, but also evaluate. And then he would ask, oh, and where are you going to place that source? In other words, as the year went on, writing the paper got harder and harder because the professor wanted more and more and more stuff. So in the beginning of your research paper, you do descriptive annotated bibliography. And then towards the end, when you're writing your capstone paper for a BA, this happens when you write these 1-year papers that take a year, or papers that take a whole semester. This usually happens in the 4th year or 5th or 6th year of college. When you're in your first 2 years of college, you're doing the descriptive annotated bibliography or summative. In other words, you're just doing a book report. But when you get to the higher levels of research, the more college you have under your belt, the more you have to have your opinion about what you think of the topic, and then you have to start to say, well, what else can be added to that topic? You have to be able to see what gaps there are, and then you have to be able to say, well, this study isn't very relevant. This study is not very good, or whatever. You start having, you know enough about your topic that you're able to critique it, basically. However, both types of annotated bibliographies, and for this class, you're mainly going to be doing this one, because you're in the first 2 years of college, and so most of your annotated bibliography will be kind of like a book report. And then later, when you get to be more expert, then you do the evaluative. So both types of annotated bibliographies follow the same format: a citation followed by a brief paragraph that summarizes and evaluates the source. However, a critical annotated bibliography requires a more in-depth analysis and evaluation of the sources. So yes, after you've spent a lot of time on your paper, then the professor starts to require you don't just summarize it, then they want your opinion on it. That actually got harder because I not only had to read it, I had to read it thoroughly, because I tend to read so fast that I do a good job summarizing, but if I have to actually critique it, then I can't just read the abstract. I got to read the whole thing and then take notes. At least that's for me, that's what happened. So for me, this first one, descriptive, was way more easier to do than critical. Anyway, so here is what your descriptive looks like, okay? The descriptive annotated bibliography example. The author talks about how social media can be good or bad for teenagers. Parents and teachers should help teenagers use social media in a positive way. An analytical, which is similar to a critical, it's same thing as evaluative. That means that you have your opinion, you put your 2 cents in there. So here the author explains how technology is used in education and discusses the advantages and disadvantages. They also look at research to see if technology helps students learn better. Critical annotated bibliography example. The author discusses how cognitive behavioral therapy is used to treat depression. They also explain that this type of therapy doesn't work for everyone and point out the limitations of the treatment. And then sometimes you combine the two. You combine all of these different styles together, and that's known as a combination annotated bibliography example. The author looks at how physical activity can help older adults with their mental health. They analyze the research and discuss the good and bad points. They also suggest ways to improve the research in the future. So, and then this is how your annotated bibliography will look like. Basically, you have your reference citation, you have your last name, first name, date. Then this should be italicized. I did not. So there you go. I made a mistake. So this should be italicized. So this article discusses so here you have descriptive, which is kind of like a book report. This article discusses the impact of social media on teenagers. The author argues that social media can have both positive and negative effects on adolescent development. The article provides examples of both positive and negative effects and highlights the needs for parents and educators to monitor and guide teenagers' social media use. And then analytical annotated bibliography. So then it's same thing. You have the author last name, first name, date, then you have to italicize all of this, and then you have the publication name, name of the journal, then the page, the edition, the edition and the volume. And then this article explains the impact of technology on education. The author analyzes the various ways in which technology has been used in classrooms and the potential benefits and drawbacks of these uses. The article also evaluates the effectiveness of technology-based educational interventions and discusses the implications for future research in this area. Critical annotated bibliography. So here you have the same thing. You have the name of the person, the date, then you have to italicize this, name of the journal, and then the page number. So this article critiques the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral therapy for depression. The author argues that while CBT is a widely used and effective treatment for many individuals with depression, it has limitations and is not effective for everyone. The article examines the underlying assumptions and limitations of CBT and suggests that other treatment modalities may be more effective for some individuals. And then, of course, you combine the two together. Okay, so you can combine the descriptive and the evaluative together. So even though they have several different kinds of bibliographies, the one that you'll be most doing for this class anyway is descriptive annotated bibliography, or summative. In other words, you're just going to make a summary of whatever you read. But if you want to, be my guest and try your hand at evaluative annotated bibliography. I'm not going to stop you. So it's good for you if you try to evaluate it or you combine the two together. So these are the two ways in which you can write your annotated bibliography for your first assignment in Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. The only difference between Part 1, 2, and 3 is that in Part 1, you're just going to look up credible sources. But in Part 2, you got to have credible sources and peer-reviewed sources. That's the difference. Okay, so Part 1, credible sources. Part 2, you're going to be doing peer-reviewed sources. And then Part 3, you put the whole thing together. That's basically it. And then you have your whole literature review. And so I'll talk about what is a literature review in a second, because in some when I was writing my master's thesis, I had an annotated bibliography at the very end of my paper, like 88 pages, and then in the middle of my paper, I had my literature review. So I will go over what is a literature review in the next video. So right now, and so your annotated bibliography goes into after the last page of your paper. That's where you put your annotated bibliographies, after the last page of your paper. So if you have any questions about what is an annotated bibliography, I think I read all of this, right? So in conclusion, an annotated bibliography is a valuable tool for organizing and evaluating sources for a research project, especially if you have a really long paper and you have like 25 sources, and when you have an annotated bibliography and you summarize each source, then you can keep track of all your sources so that you know where to put your in-text citations, basically. So it's kind of like having index cards, notes of what was it that you researched. Okay, the longer the paper, the more you need an annotated bibliography. So you think I could have remembered 88 pages? 88 pages. There were like 20 articles per page. No way I could have remembered, even back then, 88 separate articles. So yes, I needed to make an annotated bibliography to annotate each source so that I could keep track of what was it that I researched? Yeah, that's what this is for. So your annotated bibliography provides a brief summary and evaluation of each source, and then you can keep track of your sources. And then you can have descriptive, analytical, critical, and or a combination of, I don't even remember what I did. I think just like I said, in the very beginning I did a lot of summatives, and then at the end I did a lot of criticals. And I think that's what I did. And then of course I combined it because that's what the professor required. So otherwise I would have done all summative because it's much easier to do summatives. But the professor required the other stuff. So I had to do more thinking because of the professor. So anyway, the type of annotated bibliography required for a particular assignment may vary. So it is important to carefully read the instructions. Overall, creating an annotated bibliography can help a researcher save time, avoid plagiarism, and produce a well-researched and well-organized paper. Okay, now I was a little ahead of myself, so now I'm going to say, if you have any questions, feel free to email me anytime.